It's great to see some familiar names, some of our own faculty joining us. If you'd like to, you're welcome to chat in the box what city you're in, just so we have an idea of where all of our attendees are participating from today. Memphis, great. Welcome, Mary. Glad to have you here.
In California also.
Pietermaritzburg, South Africa. Welcome, Reg. I think you probably get the prize for being the furthest from our campus today. Our campus, for those who don't know, is located in San Dimas, California, in the LA area. So yeah, South Africa, Pietermaritzburg is almost halfway around the world from here.
I've never been to Memphis. How is the music scene there as vibrant as we always hear, Valenta?
I see the question there. The attendees are muted, but you're welcome to add anything you'd like to the chat. And particularly when we have some questions later on, there'll be an opportunity where we'll request that you add some things to the chat so that we have a participative interaction with everybody. Beale Street is very exciting in Memphis, huh? That's great to hear. Sounds like a good combination. Music, blues, and barbecue.
Doesn't get much better than that.
We're going to give a few more minutes for people to join, but if in the meantime, if you want to put in the chat where you're from, where you're residing today, or where you are today, just to give us an idea of where everyone, all the attendees are coming from, that's great. Moreno Valley. Well, I think given that we're 1 minute past the hour, I see these people are still joining us, but I think we'll go ahead and make a start of it. Welcome, everyone. My name is Wayne Herman. I'm the Vice President and Chief Academic Officer here at Los Angeles Pacific University. And I'm glad to welcome you to what is one of a series of webinars we've been offering on human-centered learning. And the topic for today specifically is Agile in Agile higher education. And I am joined today by a couple of colleagues, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right in. So George, why don't you go first, and then Doc, you can introduce yourself and start us off.
Hey, thanks, Wayne. My name is George Hanson. I'm the Director of E-Learning Operations here at Los Angeles Pacific University, and fortunate enough to be working in and experimenting with some Agile teamwork as we do our e-learning operations, designing courses, things like that, and well, kind of helping us define what fits, what doesn't fit, what works well, and what we can do better, because Agile is just kind of a big experiment. So that's what I do, and it's a fun time to be able to do that. And Doc, how about yourself?
Maybe just before Doc, let me just mention something I forgot to mention, and that is that this session is being recorded so that people can view it afterwards. And so if you have comments or want to add to the conversation, just feel free to put them into the chat box. We'll be monitoring those and responding to those questions as we go through the webinar today. Go ahead, Doc.
Thanks, Wayne. Howdy, everybody. I'm Doc Waltz. I am a full-time faculty member at LAPU. I teach in the organizational leadership programs, the Bachelor of Science in Organizational Leadership and the Master of Arts in Organizational Leadership. Prior to that, I have over 20 years of experience in leadership. And prior to that, 6 years in the military, primarily in the infantry. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And Wayne, if you can let me know when I have that. How's that look, Wayne?
Looks good.
Okay, let me move some stuff around just a little bit here. Okay, so welcome everybody from sunny and warm Riverside, California. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I encourage you to respond in the chat box. Wayne and George are going to team up with me to facilitate your responses. So a quick search on the internet of just what Agile is informs us of the customer-centric focus on value. And these 3 real-world phrases or elements of value propositions are just the tip of that customer-centric iceberg. Now, I personally believe that value propositions need to be transparent. I'm going to stay on this slide for about a minute or so, so bear with me. One of the many lessons I learned in my 20 years in aerospace is that value is whatever the customer says it is. Value is what the customer is willing to pay for. So we have this term, value added. If we're not adding value, our customers are not going to buy it, figuratively or literally. So with that in mind, that value is whatever the customer says it is. An initiative like Agile just has to bring value to the customer, otherwise it's wasted. And value can be measured in quality, in cost, in schedule, the 3 basic elements of project management. But it can also be measured in our internal processes, in our delivery, in our service, in our engagement with our customers. When I first was exposed to Agile in 1999, I learned that it was both a philosophy and a practice. Nowadays, we refer to it as a method and a mindset. The mindset of Agile demands 4 basic precepts or pillars. First is respect for all team members. Second is optimize and sustain workflow. The third is encourage team innovation. And the 4th is focus on continuous or relentless improvement. So that translates into doing Agile right. And if we're going to do Agile right, then we must place our customers at the center of why we do what we do. So now I'm going to throw 3 questions at you one at a time, and I invite you to type your responses in the chat for us. So here's the first one. Who are our customers? In higher education, who are they? Wayne and George, I'll ask you to help facilitate their responses.
Students,
Absolutely. Good answer.
citizens, students, and parents, students and faculty, everyone.
I like that. Everyone's a customer.
Administration, part-time faculty, broader university community. Quite a few people have said students.
Okay.
Employers, future
Excellent.
employers.
Excellent responses.
Potential students. I like that one. Potential.
Okay, I'm going to go to the second question. What do our customers want? We identified many of them. What do they want from us?
You know, Richard brought up a great point from your previous question that kind of fits this as well when he talked about getting the voice of the customer, the VOC, trying to understand that.
Value, service, caring, quality education, quality, help facilitate their goals, knowledge, career skills, earn a degree, toolbox, excellent qualification, credential for a paying job to be successful, cheap, engaging, easy, and relevant.
What would you say being successful would be? How could we define that?
The other idea that came out was network.
Well, to answer your question briefly, George, success, it's almost like it's an individual definition. Yeah, I think that our students come to us with a variety of reasons and motivations, promotion, advancement, career change, growth, just personal or professional growth. I mean, there's a number of ways they can define success. Let me go to the third question. How do we deliver value to our customers? How do we deliver it? What are the methodologies or modes of delivery? Getting any responses yet, guys? I don't have the
chat. We got a few build relationships. Peng came back and talked about how we define success very individually, like what we were saying. Engagement, responsiveness, understanding their learning needs. Kind of going back to what Richard said about the VOC, really.
Yeah.
Quality interaction.
Quality interaction.
Quality learning at a reasonable price.
Reasonable price. That's a big deal, especially today.
And college events for networking.
Quality design of curriculum and professional development to train faculty.
Yeah,
and
following through on our promises.
Ooh.
Building long-term outcomes that one carries through lifetime as compared to getting an immediate job.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on. Those are all great responses. So here we go. I searched the scholarly work with this research question: who are higher education's customers? And this is the result. This is the real world result that I got compiled for you from that search. It's quite a list, and you guys covered most, if not all, of these. Now, I need to be clear right now that the literature differentiates customers, stakeholders, and clients, and I heard stakeholders mentioned once or twice. So the connotation, as well as the perception of those 3 terms, customers, stakeholders, and clients, is different, is it not? But no matter, they are all expecting value. Since Agile is both a philosophy and a practice, a mindset and a method, and since teams are made up of individuals, I've developed my own value proposition for my higher education customers. And as a full-time professor at LAPU, my primary customers are my students. As such, they are also stakeholders. And while I might not perceive them as clients, that's not to say that they don't have clients as customers. So the value that I deliver to them, they in turn pass that value on. And I do this because there is, for lack of a better word, a calling to do so. If we're going to do Agile right, then we have to do right by Agile. And that's how we deliver value. I stated earlier to you guys that doing Agile right places our customers at the center of why we do what we do. But doing Agile right doesn't end there. It is also, and perhaps more to the point, that we do right by Agile. So what do I mean by that? We must simultaneously meet the challenges, demands, and the disruptions. I certainly would say that the pandemic has been a huge disruption that are currently present internally and externally, while preparing for those of the future. So Agile for me has always necessarily included contingency planning. So if I respect my team members, if I optimize workflow, encourage team innovation, and focus on relentless improvement, then meaningful learning from my students will always be the outcome. As a result, and in conclusion, you guys, I submit to you that our values as educators must always be hardwired to value if we're to create and sustain an accessible, relevant, high quality, inclusive, engaging, non-hierarchical, student-centric, psychologically safe, reflective, transforming, and value-added environment in our classrooms, as well as our other student-facing and behind-the-curtain operations, then we must be transparent so that our customers, our stakeholders and clients know that our values are hardwired to their value. And that is my personal value proposition. And again, what's value? Whatever our customer says it is. So thank you very much. I will now turn it back over to Wayne and George.
Thanks so much, Doc. I appreciate your focus there on value and the value to the customers. One of our values here at Los Angeles Pacific University is caring. And I think just as an example of how we have done Agile as an institution, it'd be helpful to focus on that. Besides a customer focus, one of the other key tenets of an Agile approach is organizing work in small cross-functional teams. And during the pandemic, one of the things that some of our team members began picking up, not surprisingly, and I'm sure this was true at many universities, is that students were struggling. They were struggling with mental well-being as they were experiencing the loss of the pandemic, losses of jobs, losses of loved ones, loss of personal health, et cetera, et cetera. And in our university, we have a role called the success coach, who are the academic advisors, but given our clientele, our customers, to use Doc's terminology, and the fact that most of them are what we would call post-traditional students, that is, they're people who are working, they're coming back to college after a number of years, usually out of college. Most of them are transfer students, busy lives, busy jobs. Our success coaches are the ones who walk alongside the students, along with the faculty, providing guidance and the kinds of support that the students need to help them be successful in their endeavors here. So as the coaches were engaging with students, one of the things they kept hearing from them was about the significant challenges that they were facing as the pandemic, not only as it started out, but as it wore on, so to speak, over the course of that first year. And so one of the things we did as an organization was to pull together a team of coaches, of administrators, of faculty to try to figure out how do we better address this problem. Being a 100% online institution, we did not have a counseling center on our campus as many traditional institutions would have. The coaches were providing some of that care for students, but not as licensed therapists. They were doing it really to encourage them, to provide emotional support, spiritual help, academic guidance, but not in a professional counseling role. And so this team got together, they began to look at the problem. They decided that it'd be helpful to survey the students and see what the students had to say about their own well-being. And not surprisingly, the results came back saying, this is a significant need among our students. And with that information, they were then as a team able to come up with a couple of different solutions for that. One of them was to develop an internal program, using internal resources to provide counseling service through some of our psychology faculty and others. And the other was to outsource this to essentially a tele-mental health service, which in the end, as we looked at the benefits and costs and such, the administration chose the latter option, at least as a first phase approach to this. And we engaged with the third party to be able to provide on-demand counseling, both immediate access to a counselor that they could just talk with if they were in a crisis, as well as the opportunity to schedule appointments to have an ongoing conversation with a licensed therapist who could help them work through their issues. And that has proven to be a successful intervention for our students, and in the way that they have responded to that. In fact, they still see their success coaches as one of their primary mental well-being resources, and one of the people they talk to first before they would make a use of or take advantage of the telemental health services. But the telemental health services are being utilized, and we're able to monitor that and see the effectiveness of that. So with that as just one example, I would like to take a poll here. The poll is simply asking you on a scale of 1 to 5, how much does your organization organize work in small cross-functional teams? So I've just launched the poll. Feel free to jump in there and indicate to us to what extent that is true of the institution or organization with which you work. Glad to see the responses coming through. So far, we've got at least one in each of the 5 categories. It looks like right now, regularly in the middle is the highest percentage at 32%, although right behind that is occasionally at 27% and never at 14%. So we're seeing that the often and always is 18% for often, 9% for always. So essentially, there's only about a quarter of the respondents that are in the top 2 categories. The 3/4 are between 1 and 3. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. But that's, let me see. Can you see the results now? Okay. I shared the results, so you should be able to see them there, just as a matter of interest for everyone.
Wayne, I'd be interested to see people in the chat post if the people who use Teams or have been a part of it, have those teams been empowered to make decisions and implement, or do they just bring it forward to a larger entity for approval? I'd love to see some of that in the chat as you go forward with yours.
So do they have power to implement, or are they simply a recommending body?
Yes.
Good question, George. Let's see in the chat if people are willing to share that. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this one. Looks like it's largely recommending body. Some have power to implement of authority. Yeah, sometimes it's depending on the area. That's a good point. You know, and when it comes to curriculum decisions, yes, power to implement. Yeah, thanks for those responses. I'd like to ask one more question to get responses in the chat box, and that is, what do you see as the greatest obstacles in higher education to working effectively in small cross-functional teams? What do you see as the greatest obstacles in higher education to working effectively in small cross-functional teams?
Time, approval cycles, budget.
Choosing the team members, that can be a barrier, right?
Sometimes it's not having a champion or not having a sponsor or both.
Yeah.
Sometimes
yeah, sometimes it's the fact that people are working on a part-time basis with an institution.
Well, Valenta brings up a great point about communication breakdown between teams. That can pose a whole lot of problems. Alexandra, paralysis of analysis. Yep.
Yeah. That I'm sure is a common one.
Valuing
healthy conflict. That's helpful, Lisa. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, because if we're working in small cross-functional teams, we have to be willing to be vulnerable with ideas and hear, you know, feedback that may not be what we want to hear, and be able to work through that feedback. Part of the effectiveness of Agile is building a level of trust within a team that people can give and receive feedback about their ideas, and be okay with the team opting to go with someone else's idea rather than their own.
Yeah, and Wayne, if I can reiterate those 4 precepts or pillars that I shared in my presentation. The first one is respect for all team members, and the third one is encourage team innovation. Maybe there needs to be a 5th one, and that is an integration between teams, so that if something comes out of one team, it's clearly and seamlessly transferred over to another team that might be able to utilize that, you know, the breakthrough.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of brings in Colleen's point of getting buy-in across departments too. Yeah, that's great thought.
Yeah, it kind of an integrated team, not a structure, but an integrated team communication line.
Yeah. Let me share one other example from our work that I think reflects an agile process. Excuse me. A couple of years ago, we were challenged by our president to find new ways to engage with our students on a mobile platform, recognizing that the data from our LMS was telling us that more and more students were trying to complete their studies via a mobile device. And so the question he put to us was, if I were stranded on an island with nothing but a mobile device and excellent bandwidth, could I complete what I need to do at LAPU to get a degree? And so that spawned several different initiatives, but one of them was the idea of, again, going back to human-centered design, asking ourselves, how can we get students better connected to one another and a stronger sense of belonging to the university itself? And one of our executive leaders took the lead on that and did some research into this, brought in external parties, but then invited a number of people from the organization here, from many different departments, to come together and give input into what it might look like for us to have a mobile experience for the students, and a mobile application that would help students better connect to one another, as well as to the faculty and success coaches, etc. And that team brought together faculty. Doc and I were both part of that team, George from the e-learning was part of that team, but we also had success coaches, we had enrollment counselors, we had student financial aid counselors, and we had students who spoke into that process, sharing with us what they would like to see in such an application. And again, once we had gathered that data, had gone through it a couple times and narrowed it down to what we thought was really essential, we then looked for a solution, checked out a couple of different opportunities, different third-party tools that we felt could help us create that communication platform. And we ended up going with one and launched what we call My LAPU. And it's essentially a mobile app that students can download, faculty can download, connect to all of their peers and be able to engage with them in conversation. So there's an open community, if you will, where anyone can post whatever they want. And often the kinds of things I see when I take a look at it is questions from students to one another saying, hey, I'm taking Bio 225 this session. Does anyone have any tips for me? Or does anyone have a microscope they may want to sell as a used microscope rather than having to buy it new? And others who say, hey, I'm just starting this session. I'm enrolling in ISTU 101. Would anyone like to form a study group with me? I'd love to do this with someone rather than trying to do it on my own. And then besides that, as we've developed the app, what we've done is we've built out interest groups for the students on the app that they can join if they like. There are others that they are joined to simply because of the program that they have chosen to pursue. But for example, a group like LAPU Moms or LAPU Military, those are special interest groups, that help students connect with other peers who are experiencing their studies like themselves. And it provides a level of support that they wouldn't normally get in the classroom because they don't know if this other student is a mom or they don't know if this other student is a military student. The program focused ones might be something for all the undergraduate psychology students, for example, or all of the business students who can come together and ask questions, and faculty can jump in there and answer questions for the students as students pose those questions. I see there was a question from one of our guests about the cost of that. I'd have to look that up. I don't have that at my fingertips, but if you want to send me an email at wherman@lapu.edu, I'd be glad to connect with you further on that afterwards. So those are just a couple of examples. The other kinds of things we've done, we've used Agile groups to solve academic challenges, such as how do we minimize the what we call the fade, the number of students who enrolled at the beginning of the semester, but beginning of the session, but then are not there, have not submitted anything, and by census date a week and a half later are administratively dropped for non-engagement. How do we minimize that number? And our faculty came together, came up with some ideas, shared that with, and got input from others. And through that, we've developed certain responses to how we can help solve that problem, and are seeing some positive results from that. Two of the areas we've done really well in terms of Agile process and Agile mindset have been in curriculum development and in our mobile course design, but that's really George's area. And so I'm going to turn it over to him to talk with us about the next area of leveraging networks toward a common goal.
Oh, thanks, Wayne. Yeah, leveraging networks is how we can really make Agile work well. And I say this because we're creating a culture that Agile's a mindset, not a process to go through. It's a mindset to have. And the reason why I think that it's worked really well is because Agile puts people and interactions above processes and tools. That's kind of a key of the mindset that we brought into our curriculum development: people and interactions above processes and tools. Not saying processes and tools aren't important, because absolutely they are, but we have to put people and interactions above those and stay focused on that, which works. One way that we did that, I'm going to dive into the mobile course design that we did. And one way that we did that, I'm going to piggyback off what Wayne said, is, and this is a burning question for me, is we have an LAPU cafe within each course. The LAPU cafe allows students to have ad hoc meetings or schedule meetings where other students could join in, things like that. So it's all about that building of community. So I would ask 2 questions in the chat. First off, I thought it would be a lot cooler to spell cafe with 2 F's instead of 1. And that's been a burning question of mine because I've been overruled every time. So if you prefer 2 F's over 1, please put that in the chat. But the actual question is, what do you do to build community in the online, to build belonging in the online community? What are you doing to do that? And I'm going to go through and tell you kind of how we did by engaging other networks within ours. So just let me know what you've been doing online to do that. And one way for the mobile next gen, respond to students as soon as possible, right? They want that responsiveness. Open cafe night, awesome. Synchronous meetings, devotions, all that stuff is fantastic. Personal transparency. Yeah, being real, being that authentic person builds, right? And all of these lead up to what we did for our next gen mobile design. We reached out to, we have our e-learning team, but we reach out to our external teams. Every team within LAPU had the opportunity to provide people in the design process for the next generation mobile design. And by doing that, we got some great ideas because we extended out to students as well. And the feedback that we got, we would use the Agile method where we would prototype, get feedback, prototype, get feedback. And by doing that, people had something that they could actually look at, touch, feel, if you will, and then give us quality feedback through that. And when they did that, we got exponentially better every time through every iteration. So our ability to really experiment and try things out paid off because we were able to take all that we learned and apply it really rapidly. So what would usually take 2 years took a matter of months because of that process that we went through. And that was by reaching out to external teams. Now, how do we do that? Well, for example, the biggest thing is you're creating a shared third culture with external teams. So everybody coming from a different team onto this one, different networks onto a connection point or a team at one time, that has a shared third culture. And we create that through psychological safety. Like, now I'm going to go back. So in our discussions above, the chat above, Bradley called out people unwilling to collaborate or achieve on the end state. Richard talked about knowledge sharing, not people not being willing to do that. And Colleen talked about buy-in, the lack of getting buy-in across organizations. To do that, we have to create that community feel or that psychologically safe environment, which means we create shared vulnerability, or not shared vulnerability, we create rewarded vulnerability, as Wayne talked about before. So now how do we do that? In the chat, we have discussion fears, encouragement, Zoom meetings, not mandatory, all that good stuff from Colleen in there. She like, do you like the 2 F's, Colleen? Because I appreciate you putting the 2 F's in. Sorry. So creating that shared third culture means psychological safety, and that comes in 4 stages. First stage is inclusion safety, then we have learner safety, then we have contributor safety, then we have challenger safety. So thinking back to what Doc and Wayne were talking about before, we have to have that friction, and we have to have that quality friction, both intellectually and creatively. I believe it was Lisa that brought up the point about we have to be able to disagree. We have to have conflict, good conflict, because high performing teams have that conflict. So this is exactly how we did it. First off, You build relationships with multiple networks before you even have a need for it. Physically, personally go out, reach out to networks and reach out in a way that shows you're coming with generosity and empathy towards whatever they need, not about what you need. So when the time comes and you have a project that needs some external networks to come in, they're already built. If you have a project and then you wonder about what networks to go to and you haven't built relationships yet, may not work too well. And you'll have to start from a point a lot further back. So we did this with our next gen mobile design, where we had people, the enrollment department was huge in this, student success was huge, and they gave feedback all the time. And the way we created this environment of psychological safety is we had some really game rules or plans or a contract between us on what we were expected to do. And to overcome those things like lack of buy-in and the not really focus on the end outcome, worry more about the individual outcome, was we had constant communication with everyone in that team and the larger audience of what the outcome should be. So we were wholly outcome focused, and we would have conflict on what that overall outcome should be. So that was good, positive conflict right there on how we work through it. So my question is,
George, just take a second to explain the next gen mobile design, what we mean by that.
Yeah, so the next gen mobile design is, so if you are in a course and an online course and you're online on a laptop, everything's generally fine. But when you move to a mobile device, you have a smaller screen size and you have to use different strategies and techniques for learning to happen. It has to be rich because our students, when they're on their mobile device, they're used to seeing Amazon, YouTube, and all these other very rich applications that provide great value. So we had to rethink on how we're delivering value from that mobile perspective. And we did that through using a lot more rich media. So imagine, I don't know if anyone here loves reading a 10-page manual on a mobile device, but we went through ways on how to use widgets to break down those 10-page documents into graphical pieces with takeaways, things like that, and still offer that manual for folks that enjoy that, because people do enjoy reading on their mobile device too. I don't happen to be one of them, but many of us do. If Brant's on here, Brant enjoys doing that quite a bit. So it was how we rethought learning from a mobile device, which was a big deal because we needed to increase engagement and interactivity in order to create that environment where people felt that they were getting that value from the mobile device. And we did that. We use Nobly widgets and multiple different ways to create interactions. Like one specific technique that we use is we'll start sometimes with a no stakes quiz that gives video feedback after they answer it. That's a strategy to help create mindset as well as to make learning stick, because it gets people to predict what's going to happen, even if they don't have set knowledge on it. So we do things like that. And then that sets the student up for success when they enter in and they get all the great content from our instructors and professors. So that was the big challenge. How do we provide value from a mobile device? And the way that we did that was to get all those teams together, define what value is and how learning would best occur in that. And those are the iterations that we went through for that. So from my perspective, it was actually fairly easy to get our internal networks together because everybody really heard the message from our president about the desert island. I love that speech that he gave. So what are some major roadblocks? Now, I don't want anybody to put in right now. So just type your answer in and don't hit enter yet. Trey taught me this before, and I want to see how well it works. So the question is, what is the major roadblock to working with external networks? So now just type your answer in, don't hit enter, and I'm going to give us a countdown in a second when we do that. So what is the major roadblock to working with external networks? Oh, can you elaborate more on how that works and is developed? Maybe an offline question. Yes, I will cover that momentarily. video feedback. And that really, Matthew, that is really through this tool that we use called Nobly, where you can make it relatively quick. The video feedback, 30 seconds or less, they answer a question. So I'll put that in the chat as well, and a little bit of link to the tool that we use for that, because it's very effective. And if anybody on my team is here, if you could put a link in there to maybe one of the quiz widgets that we actually have built already, that'd be kind of nice. So, in the count of 3, what is a major roadblock to working with external networks? On 3, 1, 2, 3, hit your enter button. What are the priorities? Unequal bandwidth, access,
Agreeing on a specific agenda.
agreeing on a specific agenda, communication, no preparation for the person scheduling the meeting or from the person scheduling the meeting. That's always a joy. When you just walked in cold. So those are things that are completely under our control if you're the lead, right? Because communication barriers, which is a great one, over communicate. How do we communicate? What's important for them? There's an old saying, no bad teams, just bad leaders. So as a leader, we come in and we look at all these barriers and decide early on how to overcome them. That's the key. And that's part of creating that psychologically safe environment where these agile teams can thrive and you can bring networks together. Because if you do not create that psychological safe environment, you're not going to have a high performing agile team. It won't happen. We've learned that from the Google Aristotle project, but we've known that since the 1950s as well, when the original study was done and they came up with the term psychological safety. We've noted that as well. And then there's the 4 stages that are very prevalent right now on how to build that. If anybody has any questions on that, we can talk offline on that as well. So we've stated that there's 4 stages. There's the inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and then challenger safety, and how important that it is to be able to safely challenge and get constructive feedback, constructive criticism within there. How do we do that within teams? How do you do that within your own teams so people feel free to disagree and voice their disagreement? Are there specific strategies you use? For me personally, it's just setting that environment and being the first one to be vulnerable. And I also, when I go into new teams, a lot of times I'll appoint somebody as the devil's advocate as well, just so we can make sure that somebody will disagree. Ask for alternative views, that's awesome. Initiate and model the desired behaviors, modeling, fantastic. Yeah, those are both great, and they will create that realm of that environment where we can have conflict and confirm everyone's input. Yeah. Has anyone else been in a meeting or something where you're trying to brainstorm an idea, come up with an innovative solution, and then ideas are just shot down like it's a shooting gallery at a carnival? That never helps. I think we've all been a part of that. So it's all about just creating that environment and looking from the perspective of whatever you do, from people and interactions over processes and tools. And that shows that we value people, and they're going to take that value and they're going to bring it into whatever comes from the team.
Yeah, Jessica had a good comment there. Defer judgment, number 1 rule of brainstorming.
Yes. Yes. And I have a quick question. Has anybody tried Qstorming? We've started Qstorming a few months ago, and I think it's just fantastic. It's question storming is what it is. Attack the ideas, not the person. Yes, they totally focus on the idea. Don't say, George, your idea is insane. we hear that a lot, but I'll put right in the team agreement, no shooting down unless alternative solution can be presented. All right. Outstanding. Okay, they found a couple widgets that they'll post into the chat here. So Wayne, I'll kick this right back to you. That's how and I wanted to bring up one last point. Our Master of Science in Instructional Design that we're going through the process of the WASP process to get approved. we invited external people and teams from industry. We have psychologists on there, we have instructional designers, and multiple different people from industry that are just coming together, and they feel that safety net within that psychological safe environment as they come onto the team. So it's kind of nice to see how that is transformed what we do there. So, oh, and our embed, our Nobly widget is there.
Great, thank you, George. Yeah, at this point, we would invite any questions through the chat box. If you have something you'd like to ask any one of us or all of us as panelists. But while you're doing that, let me just make a further comment, and that is to say that one of the learnings has been that an agile approach in higher education doesn't necessarily have to be the approach for every single department in the organization. Some functions within the organization lend themselves to an agile approach better than others. And if you haven't read the book Doing Agile Right by Daryl Rigby, Sarah Elk, and one other author, it's a good read. And one of the comments that they make in their book is that operations, that Agile serves best for innovation and isn't necessarily the best approach for operational issues. And I think that's a helpful distinction to make, that when we've used Agile and the examples we've shared today have largely been around how do we better innovate? How do we create new things, new ways of our students interacting with us, new ways for them the students to interact with their peers, new ways for them to learn, quite frankly, in the way we design our courses. So it's just I think a helpful recognition that becoming an agile higher education institution doesn't necessarily mean the whole organization switches over to Agile. It's identifying where that can most benefit, and then creating the structure, if you will, and the framework for being able to do that. We've been experimenting, quite frankly, with Agile, and so it's not something that we have, I would say at this point, that we've institutionalized, but we are certainly doing more and more Agile processes and approaches in the things that we do, particularly when it comes to innovation. And as we continue down this path, one of our goals is to create that framework, if you will, for how can we as an organization do Agile consistently, and where should we do it? When should we do it? When should we not do it? How will it best serve us as an organization? So, any questions through the chat box? There's the reference to the source. Thank you, Peggy. Well, let me just, if there aren't any other questions, then let me just tell you that we will be having our next webinar coming up in May. The date for that is May 26th. If you're on our list of recipients for it, we'd be glad to share that with you. Peggy has just sent a chat through about it. It's collaborative approaches to holistic learning. And we look forward to engaging people around the topic of how do we use collaborative approaches in holistically developing students. We've done a lot of work in that area. We have a book that's coming out soon that will be part of the focus of that particular webinar. But yeah, it's something I know all institutions are trying to do, is make sure they're developing students holistically. So we look forward to having you join us then. And thanks for joining us today. And thank you to my colleagues here for joining me on this webinar.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Wayne and George.
Thank you. Thanks, Doc.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Wayne.
you, Doc.